welcome to First Universalist Church in New Madison on this beautiful, beautiful Easter morning. We're pretty well supplied. We have an Easter lily, we have hyacinths, we have a couple of spring real tulips, and of course we have our sunflowers. We never want to forget Ukraine. We will mention that every week until the situation is resolved, which it looks like it's going to be a long time. 900 bodies discovered so far in the one town, civilians, many of them with their hands tied behind them. The atrocities of war are just unimaginable, unimaginable. Do we have any announcements?
I just wanted to acknowledge our successful union service with El Dorado last Sunday. 21 people somewhere in there. And you know, we thought back earlier about our small size, can we host our friends? And we did it. And despite that, by not sending out any thank you notes, thank you to everyone for lifting heavy tables out of the basement, from thoroughly cleaning the church, okay, stocking foods, ensuring hot plates and what have you, basically catering, all the catering details, and just as importantly, setting the most beautiful table and welcoming our host. Very proud. We got an applause, if you recall, there at the end of the dinner, and I think everyone had a great time, and we certainly wanted to return for our El Dorado friends and look forward to working with them, particularly at our next gathering, union service, which is the 4th of July.
4th of July will be at El Dorado.
That's right, in the park.
In the park, which we
weather.
did before. And if you didn't make the last one, very enjoyable, very nice people. I'm looking forward to spending time with them, and we may increase that a little bit, increase the union services. We're kind of in discussion to see how that works.
Yes.
Between the two of us, we actually have a working congregation, so we'll see how that works out, how well they mesh together. Any other announcements? Yes, Margaret.
On April 25th, that's a Monday evening at 7 p.m., what passes for the Sinclair bands is putting on a free concert again. It's sort of a COVID band that we put together. Sinclair would not let us all rehearse as one band in one room.
Really?
Yeah, so we rehearsed the woodwinds for the first half, we rehearsed brass and percussion for the second half. So this concert is going to last just an hour. The first half is a woodwind choir playing some really neat pieces, and I'm in that one, and then the second half is a brass percussion ensemble. I'm not sure what they're playing, but it should be pretty cool.
And the date and time again?
It's April 25th, a Monday evening at 7 p.m., and it's in Blair Hall Theater, our usual concert venue.
Okay.
And they're telling us that next year, next school year, the bands are going to be back together again the way they were before.
Good.
Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But this is a bit of an enjoyable experience,
yes,
though, because it's everything from beginning level musicians to professional musicians all in one group. So I'm not sure what the result's going to be, but we're having fun doing it, and I think it's going to be really nice.
And I can see why they separated the brass and the woodwinds. When you have an airborne virus that's out there causing danger, you don't move much air when you're doing your stringed instruments. But boy, when the trumpets and the cornets and the trombones start to blow, there's air everywhere. So you might want to wear your mask for that half. We want to remind everyone that the virus is now the new variant, which I can't even remember all the letters and numbers, is increasing again, increasing 10 to 20% in all the eastern states. We have masks here. If anybody has not been vaccinated, we request that you wear a mask. We're all vaccinated and we keep our distance. So I feel pretty confident that we're okay. But when you go out in public, which I say every week, if you go to Walmart or Rural King or any place else, Kroger's, you need to wear your mask. A lot of times I'm the only one in there with a mask, but I'll be the only one standing when everybody else is down. So, and I will smile at that. I will not smile at their terrible disease, but I will smile at the fact that they did not take precautions. Any other welcome announcements? Okay, Our prelude is naturally the Easter hymn. If you want to follow along, it's 268 in your hymnal. We try to cater to everyone, so hopefully we'll give you a little bit of everything that's in here. In doing that, our slideshow is naturally going to be on Easter, so we have the cross and the bunny and the eggs. It's all in one group. And I want to say we're welcoming Tom Rockwell, an ESR student. Nice to have him here for our guest message, hopefully many times in the future. So want to make him feel welcome, and anything you need, let us know. All right, our chalice lighting is on For Holy Days on Which We Recall Old Stories by Dillman Baker Sorrells. For holy days on which we recall the old stories, we light the flame. For Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom in the past, we light the flame. For Easter, which reminds us that love is our greatest challenge, we light the flame. For gathering today in this sacred space, we light the flame. For the opportunity to be together as a community, to remember the past, to plan for our future, to be alive in our present. And you can see by the slide we have up here, this is a once in every 33-year conjunction or confluence of events. Easter, Passover, Ramadan, and Vishnu Vaisakhi, I'm not sure what the pronunciation is, that's a Hindu religious festival, all occur within the same 2-week span, basically simultaneously. And I've got pictures of each. For Easter, you've got the Easter eggs. For Passover, you have the Seder meal, which is the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs. For Ramadan, if you can see, basically it is a picture of food in the dark. Muslims do not eat, drink, smoke, swear, basically do anything that Allah does not want them to do until darkness falls. Then I guess they can do everything. So they don't eat until it's dark. And there's some pretty interesting traditions of having a meal like at 4 or 5 in the morning before it gets light, the one big meal of the day. And then Vishnu is an interesting Hindu. It's mostly in Kerala, which is the southeastern tip of India. Basically, it's about 40% Hindu, 35 or almost 40% Muslim, and 25 or whatever's left Christian, and then a few odd sprinklings of whatever's left. Their god Krishna is one that they revere, and he is the Lord Vishnu, and they're celebrating their new year by whatever calendar they follow with the celebration of the killing of the demons. So we pay homage to each religion, each theology, no matter which one you follow. And this one I wanted to bring out. These are Easter eggs from Ukraine. Ukrainians have a real history of creating fantastically intricate Easter eggs. This is a little collection of those. Okay, affirmation. Oh no, opening hymn 269. Love and praise and thanksgiving. Hallelujah. All right. Oh, I forgot to mention my tie is, because this is Easter, this is the lamb tie. But if you look real close, there's a black sheep at the bottom. That's kind of my personal thing. So. All right. Children's story. The Easter Egg We Need by Ann S. Howard. And I have the Easter egg we need right here. Do you know who Mary Magdalene was? She was a first century Jewish woman who followed Jesus. She's been named the first apostle, or the apostle to the apostles, because she was the first one to proclaim the Easter story. The men didn't believe her. There are many legends about Mary Magdalene. Just like so many other legends and stories and myths, the truth of the legend is not dependent on historical fact, but the internal truth of the story. It doesn't matter whether it actually happened. Its truth is true enough to make us tell the story again and again. So legend has it that Mary Magdalene staged a protest in the court of Caesar in Rome. As the story goes, Magdalene was a woman of means and influence and chutzpah, and sometimes she was Jewish. And sometimes soon after the crucifixion of Jesus, she procured an invitation to dine at the court of Caesar. She had a mission. She went to Rome to protest Pilate's miscarriage of justice and to announce the resurrection. The ancient tale says that as Magdalene stood up to speak, Caesar was about to peel a hard-boiled egg. When he heard her announcement of the resurrection, he held up the egg and said, "He can no more be raised from the dead than this egg can turn red." And there in his hand, the egg turned red. I don't know if they have beets in Rome, but whatever. So. And you don't have to eat eggs. I have donuts again. So. All right. When he heard her announcement of the resurrection, the egg turned red. This may not be a story with historical weight, but it does account for those Eastern Orthodox icons of Mary Magdalene holding a red egg, which is news to me. The color that Eastern Christians dye their Easter eggs today as a reminder that God can always do something entirely unexpected. Imagine if Easter preachers and all the rest of us had the chutzpah of Mary Magdalene. That would be as unexpected as Mary's red egg. That's the Easter egg we need. And we'll go a little bit farther with Mary Magdalene. I explained to some people, my wife Tara is a pastor at New Carlisle. She is a former stage actor. She was on the stage in Chicago. She has her actors equity card, which is a pretty hard thing to get a hold of. So she does a really good job on presentations. So I copied this one from her presentation there. I'm not sure how well it's going to come across, but I am always very moved by it.
But you don't understand. You weren't there.
God.
You didn't see him there on the road. When they were driving the nails into his hands and his feet into the cross.
You going
You
down?
didn't see him being lifted up.
Am I going up or down?
You are going down.
You didn't see him die.
Okay, I'm sorry you couldn't hear that very well. It's very moving, I think. So let's. Okay. Any comments? You're getting the full Easter load today. Okay, affirmation. Why I celebrate Easter by Paul Stephen Dodenhoff. People ask me, and this slide is goes along with this little presentation, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Does everybody understand what this is? This is the Capitol Rotunda. At the top of the rotunda, there's a picture of George Washington, if you can imagine that. People ask me why I celebrate Easter even though I'm not a Christian or a believer in the physical resurrection of Jesus. I celebrate because I believe it to be a spiritual metaphor, one of the most powerful and heartening of spiritual metaphors, for our own apotheosis and resurrection to a new life. How many of you know what apotheosis means? That's the highest level you can reach in a description. This is called, the title of this painting is The Apotheosis of George Washington. He has been raised up into heaven with the angels on both sides. So we have the apotheosis, the highest that George Washington can possibly achieve, is being in his military uniform, dead of course, with the angels in heaven. So a pretty strange world we live in. We make fun of the Romans or the Greeks or the Persians or anyone else. Just remember, we have our dirty laundry too. All right, every day offers us yet again the chance to experience our own divinity and spiritual transformation. The stone is rolled away and the tomb is left empty every time we acknowledge our own Christ reality, or whatever name you choose to use. And the Christ reality of all beings and things as a part and parcel of the ultimate divine mystery, in which we live and move and have our being. To do that, we must die our small, petty ego selves, a difficult, often painful process that I believe is the inner meaning and spiritual work of Good Friday, a good day to reflect and to consider our own need to die to self, not in sorrow, but as in anticipation of what is to come. Joys and concerns.
I have a concern, before I say what it is, I just want to remember that 2,000 years ago, a really good and wise person was executed by the Roman authorities for basically saying what he thought about religion and ethics. And also a little incident at the temple with the money changers, but hardly a capital offense. And my concern is that still today, we have people in the world that are being punished, put in jail, basically just saying what they think. And so I just want to remember that really good guy, really wise guy, a person that I get a lot of really good advice from on how to live my life. Just remember him and remember that his followers basically were in the ashes right after he died, but a movement arose that is a pretty widespread movement today from that guy. So they arose, the folks that were his followers, spreading his message of love and forgiving people and not being judgmental. That's what I have trouble with, being judgmental of people. But I have that constant reminder, hey, don't be judgmental. Oh.
And you are aware of it, which makes the big difference, that you have sometimes an occasional problem, which we have noticed, by the way, of judgmental.
I noticed it all. My wife notices it too. It reminds me all the time.
And some of us have the trouble with trying to pontificate all the time, so that's also noticed, and we do our best. But we do want to remember our spiritual teacher and all of his spiritual descendants speaking the truth. Remember Khashoggi, the writer from Saudi Arabia who was tricked into going into the embassy and beheaded for speaking the truth. The Russian newspaper people or public speakers in Russia who have been actually assassinated, poisoned in multiple times. The Catholic cardinal, the Catholic whatever, it was more than a priest in South America that was killed by the Sandinista government. I think it was Sandinista government when he spoke for the poor people. This happens over and over again. People have to stand up and speak the truth, and they sacrifice things when they do. Not just money, not just position. Sometimes they sacrifice their lives. But that is what has pushed the civilization forward, and is what is scary that we may be losing now. Yes?
Keep Denise in your thoughts and prayers. Next Monday, on the 25th, she gets her knee replaced.
Oh, okay.
So she'll be able to walk without gimping around there. So
She is an inspiration to particularly me. Denise had her hip done like a year or two before I had mine done. And watching her recuperation gave me the courage to go ahead and have mine done. As a nurse, I know how dangerous surgery can be. Most people only see the good outcomes. As nurses, we saw the failures. They're the ones that came back all the time. So good luck to Denise on her knee, and I'm sure she'll have. But she going to the same place?
No, she's going here in Greenville, Chad Weber.
Chad Weber.
Yeah.
That's my hip guy, so I can
Oh, he
definitely.
did your hip?
He did my hip. Yep. So I'm 100% supporter. They use a computer. He doesn't even go in there and whack away himself. He just turns the computer on and it slices and dices, and they don't even use
He
cement
told me
anymore.
something
That may be reassuring.
Yes. All right, so we have a candle for Denise. Anyone else? Yes,
John Johansson is doing better, but he's still facing surgery.
John Johansson, okay. All right, and we want to light a candle for Sinclair's band, the woodwinds and the brass, that they have a successful and no one gets sick, and this recedes. Hopefully people will do their precautions, get their booster shots, and like I say, most people seem to think it's over, but it's not, so be careful. We want to remember, as I say all the time, Ukraine, for the damage that's being done there. I really don't, and I have not heard anybody say that there's a way out. It's pretty incredible when you stop and think about it, that one person in the world has created all this and sustains all this and makes this go. And this person is unreachable. If you've seen any of the TV shots when he's talking to his subordinates, the table is like 40 feet long. He's like sitting at one end and these little tiny people are down at the other end, and that basically tells you how much he values their opinion. That is scary. We're going back to the 1930s when you had Italy was under the fascist rule, when Germany was under fascist rule. Those individual persons, Mussolini and Hitler, decided how to do it and what to do, and they sent their nations into war and dragged the rest of us into war. And war in the First World War in the 1918 and the Second World War in 1939, 1940, the destructive weapons have magnified unbelievable, and Putin has no qualms about threatening people with nuclear weapons. So whether you realize it or not, we are in terrible times here. All right, for those thoughts and prayers, if there are any unspoken, we keep you in our hearts and our minds and our prayers. Do not be afraid to share. You can always send us a message. You can actually send us a prayer request anonymously. And it doesn't have to be a prayer request. It can be an assist for thoughtful support. All right. Tom Rockwell, ESR. I didn't get you gave me the spiritual quote, but I didn't get that. So if you can read your own. We'll
Sure. You want me up here?
Yep.
Yes.
And we do not have our microphones, so
Okay.
speak up.
I will speak up as best I can.
There you go.
Hello, I am Tom Rockwell. Today we're going to do a little bit on the book of Hebrews. So it's going to be Hebrews chapter 10, verses 10 through 24. I'll get to that in a minute, but I hope I won't offend you by telling you that I'm not going to do a traditional resurrection sort of sermon. I'm going to talk about something that's come up actually quite a bit in the slideshow and what we've talked about so far, which is sacrifice instead. I like to give a little more practical of messages, and I think this is something that's relevant for pretty much all of us, regardless of where we are on the religious, non-religious, whatever spectrum. So my home church has been doing a series on the book of Hebrews, which is famously unpreachable, and you may agree with that after this little message, or not, we'll see. But it's something that's been weighing on me, and particularly this idea of sacrifice. So the passages today will compare a lot about the Hebrew version of sacrifice and then Christ's sacrifice, and pretty much all of Hebrews is an example of like Christ is better than X, and they go through a bunch of different examples, and that's what's going to happen here, and we're going to look at what it talks about. So it's essential to understand the sacrificial system of Second Temple Judaism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So that the Second Temple Jewish period is when Jesus' ministry took place. And we often have a very, very simplistic view of what sacrifice was like in this period. We have a view that's heavily influenced by the Protestant Reformation, which essentially puts Jews in the position of being very legalistic, trying to buy their salvation from God through their sacrifices of a goat or a dove or whatever. But that was actually not how Jews understood what they were doing at all. Sacrifice for the Jews in this time was all about maintaining themselves as a covenant community. So it was about symbolically representing to everybody else that they were following the laws that enabled them to remain an exclusive people. It was about ensuring that God's covenant people stayed a Jewish people, because it was going to be through the Jewish people that God's salvation of the world was going to come about. So really the primary difference between early Christians and the Jews of this period was not that Jews thought you could buy your salvation and your worth through sacrifice. It was that Jews thought that it was essential for them to remain an exclusive group, while Christians thought that Christ's sacrifice had changed that, and exclusivity was no longer a relevant idea. But I think it was clear from what we talked about a little bit earlier today that sacrifice is actually still very relevant to us. It's rarely about goats or doves, but we talk about the ego sacrifice, we talk about sacrificing our time or our money, giving up our own interests to the wider good. So sacrifice is something that's still very relevant to most of us. And I think it speaks to us in some ways that we also have a negative reaction to it, which I think is somewhat understandable. So I'm going to try and look at two things. The first one is what the book of Hebrews says about Jesus' sacrifice and the implications of that, which we may not fully agree with because I think it's a very cosmic argument for what it means. But then I'm also going to look at what it's implying for what our new sacrifice is supposed to look like in light of the changes in sacrifice. So I'm just going to go line by line here rather than reading the whole thing to you. The first thing is, by God's will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So this is a good example of the sort of where the what would Jesus do bracelet theology kind of breaks down, and how we're actually not supposed to be just like Jesus. That's not really the point. What this passage is saying is that there's no need for another sacrifice like Jesus. What Jesus did was a final ending to something. So if one of us dies, it's not going to change the whole world in the same way that the author is claiming it did for Jesus. We're not going to have the same sacrifice, but the other part of this section is saying is that Jesus' sacrifice was intended to make us holy in some way. And I think that's a clue to what our sacrifice is supposed to look like. So holiness in this passage has two main definitions. One is set aside, to be placed exclusively. And this is what that Jewish sense of exclusivity at the time was all about. Jews had sacrificed to show that they were the exclusive people in a relationship with God, and they did these things to maintain their relationship. It was their side of the bargain. The other side of it is what we may have heard a long time ago, but what we rarely talk about now, is sanctification, which is that process by which we become holy or pure or more perfect or whatever. I think the set aside part of this definition is essentially not relevant anymore. We're no longer an exclusive people. So this is where you can remember those famous Bible passages of there's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female. God's new covenant from Christ's sacrifice is that everybody is now included in the covenant. It's not an exclusive group anymore. So we can set aside the sort of set-asideness of what holiness is. And then things become more simple. God has marked out everybody as his own. Everybody is included. There's no more set-aside special group. We're all made in God's image in some way. And I think this comes out pretty clearly in the next verse, which is the author comparing the old style of sacrifice with what has changed. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when this priest had offered for all time, and here he's talking about Jesus, one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Got a little runniness in my throat because I was lifting hay bales for Phil Baisley yesterday, so I apologize for that. So the central takeaway from that passage is that we're permanently in good standing. This isn't something that has to go over and over and happen again and again. But now everything is guilt-free, and God has set us aside to be his people. That's what the author is essentially trying to get at. But that still leaves us with our second definition of sort of becoming pure and becoming more holy. And I think the next verse talks about this in an interesting way. The author says, "For by one sacrifice, Christ has made perfect forever those who are being made holy." So now we have a couple of interesting things mixed in. One is perfect, which I don't think is something, maybe there are some perfect people in the room, but I personally have never experienced feeling very perfect. And we have this forever thing mixed in. So it gets slightly more complicated. Also, the last line of the verse is those who are being made holy. So it's not that we're holy already, but that we're already perfect in some way. So it seems very confusing, but I think this is where stuff starts to come together a little bit more. Essentially what I hear is that the process of being made whole, of being made perfect, of being made holy, doesn't need to be complete for this Christian God's view of us to be perfect. God sees us as perfect even if we're not already perfect. God's vision for our wholeness then involves not just us exclusively, but the entire universe. God sees us as connected to one another. God set aside everybody as his own. And through Christ's sacrifice, this is what I think the author of Hebrews is getting at it, God has set in course a revitalization of everybody and everything. And in that process, we're made perfect, even if we're not perfect already. Nothing that we really do makes us perfect, but by participating in the process of that renewal, we're starting to be made perfect by God. And I think something that's interesting about this is if this sacrifice is final, if this sacrifice sort of started things and those things are going to end things, then that means there's not a whole lot that we do in between that affects those events. It's a phrase I like to use. I'm a Christian Universalist. I like to use the phrase, you're damned to salvation. You're going to get it whether you like it or not. And God sees you as part of his perfect universe and his remaking, sort of whether we agree or see it that way or not. So God doesn't need us to be perfect to see us in the perfect world, even if the world is not quite yet perfect. And I would argue that our way of thinking about perfection is actually kind of a self-focused and unhealthy way of viewing it. When I think about perfection, for me, it's about me doing things very well and never doing things wrong and always getting things right. But I think the vision that the author of Hebrews is giving us is actually a view of all of us being connected together. And it has less to do with how we individually act than how we're connected to one another. So the focus is different than our individual idea of perfection. So while we're not part and totally necessary to this transformation that God's working, God is inviting us to participate in some way. He doesn't need us to drive it, but God is offering us a chance to take part in this. And I think there's a useful passage for me that's always been very moving from 2 Corinthians that says, "From now on we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer." So everyone before Christ died saw Christ as a coming king who was going to change the world and take things over by military force, and then that wasn't quite the way it worked out. In fact, he died. So some of us now see it as a guy who sacrificed himself for his ethics and his ideals. Some Christians see Christ as someone who set in course this cosmic event, but it was really not the way that how Jesus actually was not the way that people had been envisioning him. Few people saw him that way, and the few people who did see him in some healthy way were the disciples who actually ended up fleeing. Even they had the wrong vision. So I think what Paul's encouraging us in that view is to recognize that we often have these blinders, these unhealthy visions of others on, and that we need to see people more in the way that God sees us, which is in that totally connected way, through the different sort of harms and problems that come about, and less about our own individual stuff. The author of Hebrews argues that not only is God inviting us to see people this way, but he's helping us to see this way. So in the next 2 verses, he quotes the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "The Holy Spirit testifies to us about this. This is the covenant I will make with them after that time, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their hearts, and I will write them on their minds." So this is this other aspect of the new covenant, according to the author of Hebrews. God has come amongst us in Christ, and that has fundamentally changed us as human beings. Again, listen to the Apostle Paul in Romans 12. "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So this is sort of an argument for that letting go of that self-ego kind of stuff. God is already transforming us. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and don't be conformed by the patterns of the world. God has changed something fundamentally, writing the law onto our hearts and our minds. And if we live into that renewal instead of our self sort of attachments, then we are going to be living into God's transformation. So a summary of that part up till now is sort of, God sees us as a connected whole, all part of a new creation, which is perfect because we're a part of it, we're perfect. God is helping us to see everyone we meet as part of this new creation instead of seeing them in a worldly way. And by sharing our experiences of ourselves and the world and other people in this way, we can help to further that transformation, and God's already helping us to do that. So in the next verse, the author of Hebrews again quotes the prophet Jeremiah. "Their sins and lawless acts I will remember no more. And where these have been forgiven, sacrifice for sin is no longer necessary." So God has already done the work of freeing us from our shortcomings. This is part of him seeing us as already perfect. So we don't have to keep doing things to maintain our status with God. God's already assured us of our place, and because God has assured all of us of our place, then we don't have to do things to set ourselves aside from other people. We're freed from having to say we're the good people, and now we have an opportunity to respond in new ways. We're not going to be the ones who are going to change everything, is what the author of Hebrews is implying here. So what is the new sacrifice? If all the old sacrifice stuff has now become sort of irrelevant, we don't need to be exclusive, we don't need to fix things, what is our new sacrifice supposed to be? Well, there's 2 famous passages I'd like to read from you. One is from the prophet Hosea, chapter 6, verse 6, which we hear Jesus quote numerous times in the New Testament. "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, an acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings." The other readings again from Paul in Romans chapter 12. "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." So our sacrifice is supposed to be about mercy. God doesn't want us to do sacrifice in the old sense. God is in fact calling us to do something different, to be merciful and compassionate to others, not set ourselves aside from others. And our transformation into a more holy, other-oriented people is actually what Paul is saying our true worship is. Instead of worshiping of what we picture as normally singing, reading the Bible, reading other books and those sorts of things and sharing our thoughts, it's in fact being merciful and opening ourselves up to others that is our true and proper worship. And each of us doing that can serve as a call to other people in life. And I think this is the core of what the new sacrifice is really about. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, we hear Paul say, "We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." So we're ambassadors now. Ambassadors are not in control of events. They don't make the decisions. They don't do the big things in the world. But we give people an honest interpretation of what's going on. And we do that by sharing the parts of our lives that have been transformed by God, by community, by our love for other people, and by other people's love for us. So the second to last verses of the book of Hebrews say, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place, and now we're reflecting back to that old style of Second Temple sacrifice, by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart, and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, and having our bodies washed away with pure water. So I think this is essentially saying, we are all set, we're good to go. God has made it available for us to come towards God and to share that love with other people. There isn't a temple, a tabernacle, there's no more exclusive stuff we have to do. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. So again, God has changed the world. The process is already going on. And all that God is asking us, according to the author of Hebrews, to do is to testify to that fact, to testify to the fact that we've been changed by God's love, by our community, or by participating with one another. And the author of Hebrews closes on that note. He talks about, and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. So in the end, I think this is really what our new sacrifice is about. It's not about buying God off or some sacrifice that really changes the whole world for us. Our sacrifice is about giving up our self-focus and instead being open to one another and sharing how our presence with one another has changed us and how that has been an experience of God for us. And that I think we struggle now to do that kind of encouragement. There are small places like this where people come together and share their joys and concerns and offer up sort of their hopes and fears to one another. But I'm sure you've all experienced this country in the last couple of decades in the same way I have, is those places are fewer and far between. And we don't have a lot of opportunity to encourage one another or talk about the transformations that have taken place in our lives through community and through our love for others or their love for us. Those places are diminishing. So I guess my final message for today is that our sacrifice is to make sure that we keep those types of places alive, that we set aside our time and our resources to keep those kinds of environment alive, because they're the things that we need to really be transformed and to really live into the type of love that the author of Hebrews is describing. Do I come down now? Do I offer a prayer?
We always have a answer, call, and answer.
Oh, excellent! I
Yes.
love those.
That's
Okay.
a Unitarian tradition. I assume they do the same thing at El Dorado.
They did do it at El Dorado. I wasn't sure if you guys did it. All right, question and
Yes,
answer.
we're big on that.
I love that. Fantastic.
I want to thank you for the message today. One of the things that I took away from it, I've struggled for years to try to understand why people had perfectly good religions and they gave them up for Christianity. Why? Why did after 400 years did it take over the Roman Empire? And so I've come across some answers in college and some other places, but you gave me a couple of extra things, like the idea that there's no exclusiveness. We're all together, joined together as one group government. What an idea. The idea that I'm perfect, just the way I am, God has already made me that way. And so you can see why when they were talking about those kind of things to people, wow, those are some pretty good selling points.
Yeah.
And secondly, you gave me a little bit more. I was a Nicene Christian. My dad was a Methodist and then later on a Presbyterian minister when I was young. I call myself a Unitarian Universalist Christian now. But you sort of gave me a few more things from the Nicene side that I can sort of incorporate into what I'm doing spiritually. Some of those same ideas that I've talked about. Wow, what great ideas. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome. I think that Since the Reformation, we really lost a lot of that sense of Christianity as the all-inclusive faith. But I really think that when you read Paul especially closely, he brings up over and over again that, like, so in the letter to the Galatians, when he says, "You stupid Galatians," he's upset with them because they've stopped inviting Gentiles into their meetings and their dinners. That's what he's really upset about. And it sort of comes up over and over again that when Paul is very angry, it's normally because people are being exclusive in some way. So I do think that's actually the core gospel message, is that it's now open to everybody, and it's like a really critical point.
Last week we talked with Derek about Passover, and we kind of ventured into pacifism a little bit, and I have a question that I'm still mulling over, is what is our responsibility? In other words, as far as sacrifice, if we have the power like Pharaoh or like Putin to make other people sacrifice, what is our responsibility, or do you have any thoughts on that?
It's very, very complicated in my mind. I'm not a fully hard pacifist, so I think, like, if we can use our power that we have to actually help others when people who have power are using their power in a very detrimental way, we should, but we should recognize that us just having that power has a real potential to corrupt us. But to me, everything from then on is sort of situational with how you deal with it. I guess I feel like the United States is dealing with the current Ukraine crisis, like, pretty well right now, but they also probably did some things to cause the current Ukraine crisis in the grand scheme of things, so it just feels very complicated to me. I guess in my time at Earlham School of Religion, I came in not all that much of a pacifist, and I'm moving closer to, it seems like having a lot of power becomes very problematic and is very difficult to deal with.
Okay.
So that's my 2 cents right there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate the message. Time for the offering. As usual, put something in, take something out. Still haven't seen that envelope slip into the door. Still waiting for that. So, our offering music is "Morning is Broken." Oh, also, when you come up, this is Easter, and there are Easter eggs up here for anybody. When you come up, you can get an Easter egg, and you don't have to put anything in the plate. You can have an Easter egg for free. Morning is Broken. I don't know if that was written for organ, but it is a perfect match. Thank you. That's really fantastic. All right, our closing hymn. Are you ready? 290, O Day of Light and Gladness.
270.
270, I'm sorry. As I say every week, and I will keep saying. That concludes our service. We have the Extinguishing the Chalice, which I'm going to play for you, something I think I did last year, and as long as I'm here, we'll do it every year. It's called the Osterhase. It's the German thing about the little bunny, and it is a story of inclusion, of people taking advantage of other people, of nastiness and terrible activities in the world and how they can be surmounted.
Looking inside, trying to find something so small, it gets lost when left. I know they're not right, I've been here before. No matter what they say, I know that I'm worth more. Feel stronger when I stand up, show courage, not afraid. 'Cause I don't have to be this and I remember that I'm beautiful.
Happy Easter from Netto, which is a German grocery store. And that is a pretty fantastic commercial. A chicken and a rabbit get together, they hatch an egg. They have a child who is not accepted for who that child is. That child goes and creates the Easter tradition, creating happiness, sharing happiness, and coming back home. That is quite the story for me. And since I told you before, I spent some time in Germany, so I really enjoyed that. So happy Easter from the Germans. All right, there are donuts, day old, naturally from ever, and if you don't eat them this Sunday, they'll be there next Sunday, and if you don't eat them then, the dog will get them. Have a good week. Enjoy your Easter coming up this Tuesday. Share and share alike. Take your responsibilities to sacrifice and not make others sacrifice. And wear your mask. Get your booster shots. The second booster shot is now available, and once the time is up, don't let down your guard on that. All right, that ends our service from New Madison Unitarian Universalist. Seen The Money Pit. Do you remember the song at the end?
I don't think
Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Where the house is finally resurrected. That is such a fitting song, and that is such a moving song. It was perfect for Easter. Thank you, Lloyd. All right.
El Dorado also has high-quality music. Is that normal for UU churches?
No, that is very
It's abnormal.
It's if you have a stroke of luck and you're a musician.
Get a musician and
and
your rank.
it's the same thing. We're just totally lucky to find this.
Okay.
Like New Carlisle, where my wife is, they had a person who was an award-winning musician and went away. I think he got a job at some college in Carolina or someplace. So it's hard to find people, and they had to find somebody out of the church and actually pay them.
I see.
But some churches don't have the funds to do that.
Right.
So, and then you're kind of screwed.
It's just going to get harder too because there's fewer people who play the piano.
And the organ.
And the organ, yeah, really.
Yes,
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Well, so far, 100% of the UU churches I've been to have excellent music. So
I actually belong to a church where there was a kid about 18 years old who had learned to play the organ. Hallelujah. I didn't say, oh my gosh, he's going to be the last one standing, the last organ